The 70s was a unique era that left an indelible mark in the memory of those who grew up during that period. It was a time when the world seemed slow and measured, and life, despite all the challenges and changes, remained much simpler and clearer. School buses with vinyl seats, music coming from mobile ice cream vans, and the very sound of the disc phone in the house stretching throughout the rooms. All these little things created an atmosphere filled with warmth and sincerity. We lived in a world where playing outside, long summer vacations, and evening gatherings with friends seemed to be something more important than the everyday hustle and bustle. Time was slow in the 70s, and because of that, people had time to really enjoy what was going on around them. Everything from morning cartoon shows to evening conversations over family dinner became a part of life that was remembered as something very precious and meaningful. Even without the vast amount of entertainment and technology, we found joy in the simple things that were important in that moment. A musical revolution. The music revolution of the 70s in the United States was a true cultural phenomenon that had a profound impact not only on the music industry, but also on the social mood of the time. This decade was a time when the boundaries of genres began to blur, and the musical movements that emerged defined entire generations. It was during these years that rock, jazz, soul, disco, and punk experienced their heyday and shaped musical and cultural trends that persist to this day. On the one hand, the 70s were the heyday of hard rock and progressive rock. Bands such as Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, The Who, and Queen brought new sonic horizons, and their albums became real icons for the entire youth audience. The music they created was more complex and ambitious than before, with long instrumental parts and concept albums that told stories, immersing in emotion and philosophy. These bands didn't just set trends, they became part of a cultural rebellion that expressed independence and a desire to destroy old orders. At the same time, punk rock was emerging on the scene as a reaction to commercialization and stagnation in music. Bands such as the Ramones, Sex Pistols, and The Clash offered a new philosophy in music: simplicity, energy, and protest. Punk became a symbol of street culture and youth rebellion. It was used by young people to express their discontent with the existing order and to find ways to be heard without too much pomp. This music was direct and tough, which gave a sense of freedom and independence. Disco, in turn, left its mark in the 70s, defining not only musical preferences, but also dance culture. Incendiary rhythms, club dancing, bright lights, and endless parties. All this became a symbol of the era. At the peak of popularity were such artists as Donna Summer, Bee Gees, and Gloria Gaynor, whose hits became indispensable on dance floors around the world. Disco music was the epitome of pleasure, escapism, and fun, which perfectly matched the atmosphere of the time. Not to forget soul, which had its second heyday in the 70s. Artists like Marvin Gaye, Al Green, and Stevie Wonder brought deep emotional and social themes to the music, creating works that not only delighted but also provoked thoughts about social justice and love. The influence of soul music on pop culture was palpable, and many elements of the genre continued to evolve in the music of the following decades. Superheroes on screens. In the 70s, for many kids, the advent of superhero shows was an exciting event. TV series like Spider-Man or Batman brought colorful characters into our lives that we began to see as real heroes. This was the first step towards the superhero culture boom that came in the 2000s. Superheroes became symbols of the fight for justice, and each had something unique that appealed and inspired good deeds. Television shows. Television shows of the 70s became an important part of the cultural landscape of the time and had a significant impact on American and global pop culture. This period was a time when television was becoming a major source of entertainment for millions of people. In the 70s, television truly became a window to the world that not only provided entertainment, but also shaped public opinion, offered new ideas, and put important social issues on the agenda. One of the most prominent examples of this time are classic sitcoms such as The Mary Tyler Moore Show, All in the Family, and MASH. These shows didn't just make viewers laugh, but often raised pressing social issues concerning politics, gender, racial differences, and war. All in the Family, for example, with its main character, Al Bundy, who was a prime example of conservative but often funny views on life, showed how television could be used to discuss pressing issues with elements of satire and humor. In this context, the shows of the 70s became important, not only in terms of entertainment, but also as a means of expressing public opinion. serving as a mirror for the whole society. At the same time, family shows such as Happy Days and The Brady Bunch gained popularity. These programs created an idealized image of the American family, promoting the values of friendship, love, and support, which became an important context for viewers. Happy Days, for example, with its charismatic characters such as Fonzie, became not just a show about teenagers in the 50s, but also cultivated the idea of optimism, youth, and adventure that viewers of the time were looking for. In addition, the 70s was a time when various talk shows and music programs such as The Mike Douglas Show and American Bandstand hit the screens. These shows not only put popular music hits in the spotlight, but also offered celebrities and showbiz stars in a more human and accessible light. The subjects of these programs often became the center of discussion in social circles, as they highlighted interesting aspects of the lives of famous personalities, from their creative achievements to their personal experiences. Parallel to sitcoms and talk shows, the 1970s was a time when new forms of television dramas, such as Kojak and The Rockford Files, were emerging. These series with crime themes, gripping plots, and colorful characters gained popularity among viewers, especially those interested in edgy detective stories and explorations of human psychology. They also epitomized a new approach to television content, where series became more mature, touching on themes of morality, justice, and social responsibility. Music shows also played an important role in the 70s, providing a platform for iconic artists such as Elvis Presley, the Jackson 5, ABBA, and others. Soul Train, for example, became legendary for its role in popularizing soul music and dance culture among African-American audiences, while American Bandstand remained a bridge between musical genres and mass audiences, presenting the music and dance trends of a new generation. Television shows of the 70s were more than just entertainment programs. They became cultural phenomena that defined how people perceived not only television art, but the very fabric of society itself. During these years, television helped create a national identity, and many shows and characters, such as Fonzie from Happy Days, became true icons, remaining in the memories of generations of viewers. Safe streets. In the 70s, the streets of the United States were perceived as much safer and more peaceful than they are today. It was a time when children could walk through neighborhoods and play outside without constant adult supervision, and parents didn't worry as much about their children's safety. There was not the same level of concern about crime or other dangers as there is now, and the general atmosphere of public space was more open and friendly. One of the most important aspects of safe streets at the time was the lack of widespread use of automobiles. In cities and suburbs, everything was much closer, and people often preferred to walk or ride bicycles. Many neighborhoods were set up so that children could play safely on sidewalks or in yards without being threatened by traffic, as is often the case now. These neighborhoods often had friendly streets where there were always familiar faces and neighbors often looked out for each other. This sense of community and safety was created not only by the low crime rate, but also by the customs and habits of local residents. At that time, there was no sense of constant threat. Kids could walk down the street, ride their bikes, or just meet friends on the corner to play soccer or hang out. Their parents often didn't worry that something might happen. Most teenagers left the house in the morning and did not return until dark, and their absence caused little or no concern for their parents. The streets of the 70s were also different from today's streets in that much of society was more oriented towards social and cultural events. It was a time when cities hosted fairs, street markets, and various festivals. A person strolling down the street could meet acquaintances, strike up conversations with neighbors, or simply enjoy time in the fresh air. Life on the street in the 70s was slower, more accessible to all age groups and classes. There was also much less coordinated commercial activity at that time. Stores, restaurants, and cafes were not as massive and did not occupy every available space. There was often a more relaxed atmosphere on the streets, and people stayed focused on socializing and the simple pleasures of walking through neighborhoods. Of course, each neighborhood had its own peculiarities and problems, but in general, safety on the streets was taken as a given. In this context, it can be said that the streets of the 70s, while relatively safe, provided people with a sense of freedom and openness that is often lacking in today's world. Real old cars. The cars of the 70s were not just transportation, but part of the culture. Cars like the Chevrolet Camaro, Ford Mustang and Dodge Charger were symbols of freedom, style, and power. Engines roared and chrome parts glistened in the sun as we rolled down the roads. These cars were truly powerful, and driving them felt like a real adventure. It was a time when the automobile was a symbol of independence and adulthood. The first personal computers. In the 1970s, the first personal computers, such as the Apple II, began to appear. Although they had nothing in common with today's high-speed devices, they were the first step in future technological advances. For many of us, it was a window into the future, a chance to try new technologies, create our own programs, or just play the first computer games. It was a period when we were beginning to realize that technology could change not only our daily lives, but the whole world. No social media. The lack of social media in the 70s meant that our social lives were more real and not dependent on likes and comments. We interacted with friends face-to-face, shared experiences, joys and worries together. This allowed us to build real relationships, free from the filters and masks that are now part of our online lives. We were able to fully enjoy live communication and stay in the world of real feelings. Real kids on the street. Childhood in the 70s was filled with outdoor activity. We spent whole days playing soccer, skateboarding, or hide and seek. We would return home only when it was starting to get dark and we didn't need to be disturbed by our parents. We learned important life skills such as teamwork, conflict resolution, and the simple ability to enjoy the moment. It was a time when we could be truly free and open to new experiences. No internet. The absence of the internet in the 70s meant that we could fully focus on our real interests and hobbies. We weren't consumed by an endless stream of information and could spend time outdoors, pursuing hobbies or watching our favorite television shows. Instead of spending time in front of a screen, we could be engrossed in books, games, or just spending time with loved ones. Cartridges and slot machines. Cartridges and arcade machines were an integral part of the pop culture of the 70s and 80s, and it was during this decade that the era of video games began and completely changed the way entertainment was done. The gaming industry was just getting started, and the advent of cartridges for home consoles, as well as the first mass-produced arcade machines in public places, was a true revolution in the world of entertainment. Cartridges, such as those for consoles like the Atari 2600, were a key element in the development of home gaming. These small plastic devices with chips inside allowed players to download and play video games right on their TV, which was something incredible for the time. Unlike older board games or more expensive arcade games, cartridges offered the convenience of home use. You just had to insert them into your console and the game would appear on the screen. The Atari 2600, released in 1977, became one of the most popular game systems at the time, and its cartridges offered a wide variety of games, from simple arcade action games to sports simulators and racing. Cartridge-based games such as Space Invaders, Pong, and Pac-Man quickly gained popularity. These games, while seemingly simple by today's standards, offered a new and exciting way to interact with the screen and created excitement that appealed to people of all ages. Inserting a cartridge into a console and starting to play was as easy as turning on the television. And it was this accessibility that made video games a mass phenomenon. At the same time, slot machines became an important part of urban life. These huge machines in cafes, bars, stores, and amusement parks were real magnets for young people. Slot machines such as Pong, Space Invaders, Asteroids, and Donkey Kong drew people in with their flashing lights and sound effects. The most famous arcade games, such as Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man, have become true symbols of the era. Pac-Man was especially loved for its unique mechanics and charismatic character, which became iconic. Slot machines offered a new type of entertainment, where a person could feel like a hero, coping with challenges and overcoming obstacles, and the game turned into a kind of competition with himself or with other players. Home console cartridges and arcade games in public places not only offered an exciting pastime, but also provided the basis for the formation of an entire video game industry that was just beginning to take off. For teens and young adults of those years, they became a symbol of 70s youth culture, and for many a source of early memories of how entertainment and technology began to intersect in a whole new format. Even though technology has now moved on, the nostalgia for these simple but addictive games remains with the generation that grew up in those years. and cartridges and arcade machines are still associated with a time when video games became part of everyday life. Disco culture. In the 70s, disco music was at the height of its popularity. Nightclubs with mirror balls, dancing to the sounds of the Bee Gees and Donna Summer, colorful costumes and club culture became an important part of our lives. It was a time when music and dancing could bring people together, creating an atmosphere of joy and carefree spirit. Every night in the club was a real holiday filled with energy and fun. Simplicity and honesty in advertising. The simplicity and honesty in 70s advertising is one of the key differences between that time and today's advertising campaigns. Advertising messages in those years were less overloaded with excessive emotion, complex symbolism, or aggressive marketing. Instead, advertising more often appealed to common sense, simplicity, and truthfulness, making it accessible and understandable to a wide audience. An important aspect was that advertising in the 1970s emphasized the real characteristics of the product and often did not attempt to create artificial images or inflated expectations. In those years, commercials and advertisements were mostly about how a product could improve the consumer's life without intrusive promises of miracle results. For example, television and radio commercials for household appliances, cosmetics, or automobiles often contain clear and concise descriptions of the product's functional characteristics, showing how it could make everyday tasks easier. Advertisements for food products, such as cereals, beverages, or frozen foods, were characterized by the use of clear and believable claims about benefits and quality, without attempting to hide disadvantages or exaggerate benefits. The advertising faces tended to be ordinary people rather than superstars, which created a sense of intimacy and trust. An example of this approach is product advertisements featuring famous actors or couples who showed in commercials how they used the product in their daily lives. These commercials were simple and sincere, without dramatic storylines or complex visual effects. In this context, the commercials were more about creating a trusting relationship with consumers than manipulating their emotions. Television commercials of the time, usually 30 seconds long, offered information in a straightforward and clear manner, without excessive expression. Advertisements in magazines and newspapers were also characterized by simplicity and clarity. Text was often the main element of the advertisement, and it mostly contained a list of product features and benefits, with a minimum of flashy images or decorative elements. The main emphasis was on real usefulness and value, rather than creating fantastical images. In fashion advertising of the 70s, for example, clothing advertising campaigns often emphasized the comfort and practicality of clothing rather than showing an idealized lifestyle. Simplicity in advertising was also expressed in the honesty of the approach. Unlike the more complex and multi-layered advertising strategies that became popular in the following decades, advertising in the 1970s often avoided manipulation and false promises. Products were advertised in such a way that consumers could easily appreciate their merits. This honesty and clarity in the message fostered trust between brands and their customers. On the other hand, advertising in the 70s was also quite straightforward, not trying to make the product coveted in the context of a desirable lifestyle, as is common in modern advertising campaigns. For example, advertisements for a car often emphasize its value, fuel efficiency, or safety, rather than portraying the luxurious lifestyle or social status of the owner. This also helped consumers make decisions based on rational factors rather than emotional ones. This honesty in advertising was overshadowed in the 1980s and subsequent decades, when marketing companies began to more aggressively incorporate emotional and psychosocial components into their campaigns. Tape recording process. We enjoyed the process of recording music from the radio to cassettes. It was not just a technical act, but a ritual. Classic family movies. In the 70s, iconic family movies such as Star Wars, Jaws, and Close Encounters of the Third Degree began to emerge. Not only were these movies becoming a spectacle for generations, but they were changing the way special effects, storylines, and character creation were approached. They were pictures that we experienced with all our hearts, that made us laugh, worry, and rejoice. Cigarettes and jeans. Cigarettes and jeans became part of youth culture in the 70s. For many, it was a way of expressing their individuality and protesting against established norms. Jeans were a symbol of freedom and comfort, and cigarettes were part of the lifestyle of those years. It was a time when fashion for clothes and accessories became more democratic, and everyone could choose what they would wear. Summer vacation in the fresh air. Summer vacations in the 70s were spent outdoors, away from the TV screen or computer. We rode bicycles, camped in the backyard, explored forests and meadows. It all gave a sense of freedom and independence. Sandboxes, forests, and rivers became places where we could meet friends, build our worlds, and enjoy carefree days surrounded by nature. TVs with manual settings. TVs of the 70s were heavy with manual settings to adjust the channel and volume. To change the channel, you had to get up and turn the knob, which in itself became part of the viewing ritual. We often changed channels with friends or family so we wouldn't miss an important show or match, and sometimes television programs were so rare that the wait became an event. This added liveliness and interactivity to the viewing experience. Postcards and letters. In the 70s, there were no emails, and we wrote letters to each other and sent postcards. It was one of the most personal ways to communicate. Letters became little jewels that were kept in drawers, reread, and passed down. Sending postcards from vacations or for vacation greetings was a tradition that cemented bonds and gave a special warmth to relationships. The first videotapes and VHS players. Video cassettes and VHS players were a real breakthrough in the 70s, opening the door to home theater. We could record our favorite programs or movies to watch later. Remember how we would spend hours picking out movies at the video rental store, poring over boxes with brightly colored covers? It was a new way of interacting with the cinematic arts that started home viewing and created an entire entertainment industry. Movie theaters and nightly premieres. The movie theaters and nightly premieres of the 70s were an important part of the culture of the time, creating a unique sense of shared experience of spectacle and live interaction between the audience. At the time, movies were not just an entertainment event, but also a social event that drew people to social recreational activities. For many, the 1970s was a time when cinemas became centers of cultural life, especially in large cities. One of the highlights of movie theater life in the 70s was the night premieres of films. These were events where real movie fans gathered, ready to queue for hours to be the first viewers of a new movie. These premieres were often held on a Friday or Saturday night, and they usually became a real ritual for movie lovers. Cinemas were places where people not only enjoyed new movies, but also could meet friends, exchange many impressions, and feel the atmosphere of the event, which made going to the movies a real holiday. Unlike today, when movies appear on streaming services almost simultaneously with the box office, in the 70s, the release of new releases in theaters was a moment people looked forward to. There were late-night premieres of big movies like Star Wars, 1977, Jaws, 1975, 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968, and other iconic films across the country. These movies often became more than just popular. They became real cultural phenomena, and watching them on opening night was something exceptional. People would gather in huge queues, eagerly waiting for the moment when the theater doors would open to finally see the long-awaited picture. The process of watching the movie itself was also special. Unlike modern multi-screen complexes, the cinemas of that time often had one large hall, and each viewer felt like part of a collective, experiencing the same impression of the picture. There was complete silence in the hall when the favorite tape began, and the reaction of the audience was instantaneous. Laughter, shouts, applause. People's emotions were unrestrained and sincere, which created the feeling that this was an important event for everyone. In addition, present. The 1970s saw the advent of new technologies in filmmaking, such as improved picture and sound quality, which made watching movies in the theater more exciting. Audiences came not only to see a new movie, but also to experience the thrill of the latest technology. Powerful stereophonic sound systems and large screens. Nightly premieres also led to the formation of true movie fans, who followed each new movie, scouring film magazines for information, discussing the news in movie clubs or on the phone. They felt they were part of something bigger than just going to the movie theater. Nightly movie premieres in the 70s also opened up new cultural horizons for audiences. The time when films by directors such as Francis Ford Coppola, Stanley Kubrick, George Lucas, and landmark superhero and sci-fi films were released set new standards in the movie industry. These films became the basis for what we now call cult classics, and it was the opening night premieres that created the initial hype around them. The movie theaters and opening nights of the 70s were a time when cinema was the center of social life, bringing people together and allowing them to experience unique cultural moments together. It was an era when the cinematic experience transcended ordinary viewing and became a meaningful event that left a mark on viewers' lives for years to come. Time to read books. In the 70s, we spent more time reading books than we do today. Books were the primary source of information, entertainment, and knowledge. Young people read the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, Ken Kesey, Stephen King, and adults could not tear themselves away from the novels of Hemingway and Plato. The books we read became an important part of our worldview, and libraries were always full of people willing to borrow books. Board games with friends and family. Board games were a great way to spend time with friends and family. Monopoly, Scrabble, Clue, Risk, and many others were not just games, but moments when we all got together and competed. We laughed, worried, and planned to win, and every gaming event became a real treat. This time was not without stress, but the games helped us distract ourselves and enjoy each other's company. Time for a long talk. In the 70s, people often spent evenings talking to each other in real life. We shared new ideas, discussed politics, music, movies, and books. It was a period when conversation mattered and every opinion was valued. We were able to listen, discuss, and accept different points of view, which allowed us to deepen our knowledge of the world and understand each other better. Advertising on radio and television shows. Advertising in the 70s was very colorful and memorable. It not only promoted products, but also created a special atmosphere. Programs like Saturday Night Live and popular radio shows told jokes and funny stories about brands, creating an unforgettable aura for them. We remember the Coca-Cola commercials that became iconic thanks to the songs, or the old car commercials where the cars looked like real works of art. The speed and independence of cars. The cars of the 70s were powerful and independent. When we got behind the wheel of cars like the Mustang or Corvette, the feeling of freedom was impossible to describe in words. It was an era when road adventures were truly exciting, and every new turn in our journey promised something unexpected and surprising. These 25 points are just a small part of what makes childhood and youth spent in the 70s special and unforgettable. Nostalgia for these times reminds us of the simplicity, sincerity, and amazing moments that formed the basis of our lives during that period. Time has passed and the world has changed. We no longer live in the era of slow rhythms and lack of technology. But those moments from the 70s, when everything was simpler and more sincere, remain in our memories. They have become not only part of our biography, but also part of what makes us who we are today. Simple things, smells, sounds, and sensations remain in our hearts as a reminder that true happiness is not necessarily tied to innovation in the fast pace of life. These memories of that time fill us with nostalgia, teach us to appreciate the present moments, and remind us that what matters is not how fast time goes by, but how we are able to enjoy the here and now. Looking back, we realize that the 70s gave us not only bright moments, but also important lessons. These lessons are still relevant today. Joy can be found in the simplest things, and the world, no matter how it is still full of beauty and meaning if we know how to notice it. By remembering that time, we can reconnect with what is important and pass that sincerity and joy onto new generations.